Hi there. Welcome to Dreamy Histories channel. Tonight, we're standing in a dimly lit medieval bedchamber where Queen Isabella of Bavaria hasn't touched water in 6 months. And the smell, well, let's just say you'd need more than a clothespin for your nose. You watch as her ladies-in-waiting carefully wipe her skin with dry linen cloths, believing that water would open her pores to deadly miasmas and plague. If you were actually transported back to this moment, you probably wouldn't last 5 minutes before gagging on the combination of body odor, rotting rushes on the floor, and the peculiar sweetness of decaying flesh from the rat that died somewhere in the walls last week. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below with where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing our global community of night owls and history lovers. Now, let's drift back in time. You're witnessing one of history's greatest misconceptions unfold before your eyes. The year is 1403, and across Europe's royal courts, physicians are spreading their revolutionary medical advice. Water is dangerous. You watch Queen Isabella's personal doctor explain, with absolute conviction, that bathing opens the body's pores, creating gateways for pestilence and evil humors to enter. The irony, of course, is that by avoiding water, these royal women are creating perfect breeding grounds for the very diseases they're trying to avoid. You follow Isabella through her morning routine, and it's nothing like what you'd expect from royalty. Instead of a refreshing bath, her servants perform what's called a dry wash. They take rough linen cloths and basically scrub the visible dirt off her skin. Think of it as an aggressive exfoliation session. Except instead of removing dead skin cells, they're just redistributing the grime. The cloth turns brown within seconds, and you notice the servants trying not to wrinkle their noses as they work. The bathing fear isn't limited to Isabella. You travel across the Channel to England, where you find Queen Elizabeth I following similar practices. She proudly declares that she bathes once a month, whether she needs it or not, and her courtiers consider this excessive. Most noble women bathe perhaps 4 times a year, usually before major religious holidays. Between these rare ablutions, they rely on changing their undergarments to maintain cleanliness. The logic goes that clean linen worn against the skin will absorb impurities and sweat, carrying away disease. You peek into the royal wardrobe and discover mountains of white linen shifts. These undergarments are the real heroes of medieval hygiene, changed daily or every few days by the wealthy. The belief is that white linen has purifying properties. It's basically treated like a full-body detox wrap. Servants boil these shifts in lye and ashes, creating a harsh alkaline solution that actually does kill some bacteria, though nobody understands why. Moving through the castle, you notice something peculiar about the architecture. Those gorgeous medieval castles you see in fairy tales. They're designed specifically to avoid bathing. The few dedicated bath chambers that exist are often converted into storage rooms. You find one such abandoned bathroom in Windsor Castle, where the wooden tub has been repurposed to store wine barrels. The elaborate system of pipes and heating mechanisms, installed at great expense just a generation earlier, sits rusting and forgotten. The medical theories behind this water phobia are fascinatingly complex. You sit in on a lecture by Henri de Mondeville, surgeon to Philip the Fair of France, as he explains the 4 humors theory. According to him, the body maintains a delicate balance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Water, being cold and wet, dangerously increases phlegm production. Too much phlegm leads to respiratory infections, brain fog, and eventual death. It sounds ridiculous now, but these physicians can point to real evidence. People who bathe in public bathhouses often do get sick. Of course, they don't realize it's because hundreds of people are sharing the same tepid, filthy water. Not because water itself is dangerous. You witness the tragic consequences of these beliefs firsthand. Young Princess Margaret of Denmark arrives at the Scottish court for her wedding, and within weeks, she's covered in painful boils and rashes. The court physicians forbid bathing, insisting it will make things worse. Instead, they prescribe bloodletting and purging, weakening her already compromised immune system. The skin infections that could have been prevented with simple soap and water instead fester and spread. Historians still argue whether she died from sepsis or from the treatments meant to cure her. You watch in horror as Queen Elizabeth I's ladies-in-waiting carefully paint her face with a thick white paste. And you realize that's not makeup, it's pure lead. The mixture, called Venetian ceruse, contains white lead powder mixed with vinegar, and every application is slowly poisoning her. The bitter irony is that the more it damages her skin, creating pockmarks and discoloration, the more she needs to apply to cover the damage. It's a vicious cycle that will eventually contribute to her death, though nobody in this room has any idea. You lean in closer and notice the application process is meticulous. First, they spread egg whites on her face as a primer. At least that part's relatively harmless. Then comes the lead paste, applied in layers so thick you could carve your initials in it. The smell of vinegar makes your eyes water. But the ladies continue their work, adding rouge made from cinnabar. That's mercury sulfide, another deadly poison. For her lips, they're using a mixture containing more lead and crushed beetles. Every kiss she gives is literally toxic. The obsession with pale skin drives these dangerous practices. You travel to the French court, where Marie de Medici is having her morning beauty routine. Her ladies bring out small pots of various potions, and you recognize the distinctive blue bottles containing aqua tofana, a beauty water that's actually an arsenic solution. Just a few drops in water supposedly creates a luminous complexion. It also causes chronic arsenic poisoning, leading to hair loss, organ failure, and eventually death. Some historians argue whether these beauty products were sometimes used deliberately to poison rivals, as the symptoms could easily be mistaken for natural illness. You're transported to Renaissance Italy, where you watch Lucrezia Borgia at her vanity. The array of beauty products before her reads like a poison maker's inventory. There's sublimate of mercury for removing freckles, which causes gums to recede and teeth to fall out. A jar of Solomon's water catches your eye. It's a mercury chloride solution that promises to cure acne, but actually eats away at skin tissue. She dabs it on a small blemish, and you wince knowing that spot will become a permanent crater within weeks. The pursuit of beauty extends beyond the face. You observe as noble women across Europe use belladonna drops in their eyes. The plant's name literally means beautiful woman in Italian, and it dilates pupils to create an alluring, wide-eyed look. What they don't realize is that repeated use causes vision problems, hallucinations, and can lead to complete blindness. You watch a young duchess stumble through her chambers, barely able to see after years of daily applications, still insisting her ladies add more drops because her husband prefers the doe-eyed effect. Hair removal practices are equally terrifying. You witness Queen Catherine of Aragon's ladies preparing a depilatory cream made from quicklime and arsenic. The mixture is so caustic it can dissolve hair within minutes, along with several layers of skin if left on too long. They test it first on a servant girl's arm, watching as she bites her lip to keep from screaming, while the flesh turns angry red. Only when they're satisfied it won't cause immediate disfigurement do they apply it to the queen's forehead. Yes, a high forehead is fashionable, so they're chemically burning away her hairline. You follow the beauty trends to Austria, where Empress Elizabeth is pioneering new treatments. Her famous beauty regimen includes face masks made from raw veal and crushed strawberries, relatively harmless, but also includes drinking arsenic-laced water for that coveted translucent skin. She's built up such a tolerance that she can consume doses that would kill a normal person instantly. Her ladies whisper that she can never stop taking it now. The withdrawal would be fatal. The cosmetics industry of the time is completely unregulated, and you watch merchants in London's markets selling their wares. One particularly enterprising vendor offers Dr. Batty's asthma cigarettes for ladies who want to maintain a fashionably pale complexion. They contain arsenic and claim to prevent the flush of exertion. Another stall sells Laird's Bloom of Youth, which promises to remove wrinkles but contains enough lead to poison an entire household. The vendor demonstrates on his own weathered face, and you notice his hands shake with the telltale tremor of lead poisoning. Even hair dye is lethal. You observe as Italian courtesans bleach their hair using concoctions containing lye and saffron, spending hours on rooftops with their hair spread over wide-brimmed crownless hats. The caustic mixture burns their scalps, creating weeping sores that never quite heal. Some add liquid mercury to achieve a particularly luminous blonde shade. The neurological damage accumulates slowly. First comes irritability and mood swings, then tremors, and finally complete madness. Venice's infamous asylum is filled with women who sacrifice their sanity for golden hair. The symptoms of cosmetic poisoning are everywhere once you know what to look for. That noblewoman's trembling hands, mercury poisoning from her skin lighteners, the duchess who can't stop drooling, lead has destroyed her muscle control, the young bride whose hair falls out in clumps, arsenic accumulation from her complexion enhancers. Court physicians diagnose these symptoms as hysteria, melancholy, or divine punishment for vanity, never connecting them to the very products meant to enhance beauty. You're standing in the magnificent Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, and the stench hits you like a physical wall. Behind those gorgeous tapestries, you spot a duchess hiking up her elaborate gown and relieving herself directly onto the marble floor. There's no embarrassment on her face. This is completely normal. The palace has exactly 0 functioning toilets for the thousands of courtiers who live here, and chamber pots are considered too lowly for public use. So they improvise. And by improvise, I mean they turn every corner, stairwell, and curtained alcove into an impromptu bathroom. You follow a group of ladies in waiting as they navigate the palace corridors, and it's like watching an elaborate dance of avoidance. They lift their skirts high, stepping carefully around fresh piles of human waste. One young woman isn't paying attention and steps directly into a puddle of urine with her silk slipper. She simply shrugs and continues walking, leaving wet footprints down the hall. The smell from her shoe mingles with the general miasma of thousands of unwashed bodies, rotting food, and accumulated excrement that defines daily life at Versailles. The situation is so bad that Louis XIV issues regular edicts commanding courtiers to stop defecating in the hallways. You watch a herald read the latest proclamation, threatening fines for anyone caught relieving themselves outside designated areas. The problem? Those designated areas don't actually exist. The few public latrines are so revolting that even servants avoid them. You peer into one and immediately understand why. It's essentially a wooden bench with holes cut over a pit that hasn't been emptied in months. The stench could peel paint, and flies swarm so thick you can barely see the walls on. You attend a formal dinner where nature calls for the Duchess of Orléans. Instead of leaving the table, which would be considered rude, she simply spreads her voluminous skirts and goes right there at her seat. The sound is unmistakable, but conversation continues without pause. A servant discreetly slides a silver bowl under her chair to catch what they can, but most of it ends up on the floor. Later, you'll see servants throwing sawdust on the puddles and sweeping them toward the windows, where everything gets dumped into the gardens below. The palace's design actually makes things worse. You climb the famous ambassador's staircase and notice dark stains on every landing. These prestigious stairs are favorite relief spots because they offer semi-privacy behind the balustrades. The marble is permanently discolored from years of urine, and you spot fresh evidence that someone used the corner just minutes ago. The irony is stunning. This staircase costs more than most people's houses, and it's basically functioning as a multi-story latrine. You discover that even the royal family isn't immune to these conditions. The Princess de Conti shows you her private apartments, and while she has a close stool, a fancy chair with a chamber pot, her ladies-in-waiting don't. You watch them take turns using a corner of her antechamber, their elaborate court dress making the process ridiculously complicated. It takes 3 women to hold up the princess's train while she squats. And even then, accidents happen. Those gorgeous gowns you see in paintings, they're often stained at the hem with things you don't want to think about. The morning levee of Louis XIV provides a particularly surreal scene. While the king sits on his closed stool, conducting state business, dozens of courtiers stand around pretending nothing unusual is happening. The smell is overwhelming, but showing any sign of disgust could end your career at court. You notice one young nobleman turning green and excusing himself, only to vomit in the hallway, adding another layer to the palace's olfactory nightmare. Historians still argue whether the king's casual attitude toward bodily functions was a power move or simple necessity. You venture into the servants' quarters and find conditions even worse, without even the pretense of privacy. Servants relieve themselves in communal buckets that might get emptied once a day if they're lucky. You watch a kitchen maid carry a sloshing bucket down 3 flights of stairs, spilling with every step. The staircases are slick with waste, and she slips near the bottom, dumping the entire contents across the floor. She simply gets up, leaves the mess, and returns to work. Cleaning it would be pointless when the next bucket will spill in an hour anyway. The gardens offer no escape. You walk through the meticulously designed parterres and immediately spot courtiers ducking behind hedges. The beautiful fountains everyone admires. They're popular bathroom spots because running water helps mask other sounds. You actually witness a diplomatic incident when the Spanish ambassador discovers 2 French ladies using the grotto he'd claimed for himself. The subsequent argument about bathroom territory would be funny if it weren't so desperately sad. Even religious ceremonies aren't sacred. During a particularly long mass at the palace chapel, you notice ladies discreetly relieving themselves where they stand. The combination of heavy incense and human waste creates a uniquely awful smell that makes your eyes water. The priest continues droning in Latin, pretending not to notice the growing puddles in the pews. A court lady later explains that leaving during Mass would offend God more than a little accident, though you suspect convenience plays a bigger role than piety in that logic. You peer into the mouth of Marie Antoinette during her morning toilette, and it's like looking into a cave of horrors. Her teeth, what's left of them, a black stump swimming in infected gums that constantly ooze pus. The smell emanating from her mouth could knock a horse unconscious. And you notice her ladies-in-waiting discreetly turning their faces away whenever she speaks. She's only 35, but her mouth looks like it belongs to someone twice her age, ravaged by the French court's obsession with sugar. You watch her breakfast routine, and it explains everything. She starts with hot chocolate so sweet, it's basically liquid candy, followed by pastries dripping with honey and crystallized fruits. For someone who supposedly said, "Let them eat cake," she certainly practices what she preaches. Each bite sends visible waves of pain across her face, but she continues eating, dabbing at the blood that seeps from her gums with a lace handkerchief. The handkerchief, you notice, is already stained rust brown from previous meals. The royal dentist arrives, and you instantly understand why dental appointments are treated like public executions. His tools look more suited to carpentry than medicine. Massive iron pliers, hooks that belong in a butcher shop, and a collection of wooden wedges stained dark with old blood. There's no anesthetic except a few swigs of brandy, which Marie Antoinette gulps desperately. You watch in fascinated horror as he positions the pliers around a molar that's basically held in place by infection alone. The extraction takes 4 agonizing minutes of twisting and pulling, while 6 servants hold the Queen down. You follow the history of royal dental disasters back to Elizabeth I of England, whose teeth were so rotted that foreign ambassadors couldn't understand her speech. Contemporary accounts describe her teeth as black as coal, and mention that she stuffed her cheeks with cloth before public appearances to hide her sunken face. You watch one such preparation as her ladies carefully position white fabric inside her mouth to simulate the fullness of someone who still has teeth. The effect is grotesque. She looks like a chipmunk storing nuts for winter. The sugar consumption among royalty is absolutely staggering. You attend a feast at Hampton Court, where every single dish contains sugar, even the meat. They're sprinkling it on roasted venison like salt, mixing it into wine, and sculpting entire centerpieces from pure sugar paste. One courtier shows you his private sugar box, a jeweled container he carries everywhere, constantly dipping his finger in for quick hits throughout the day. His remaining teeth are grey-brown nubs that wobble when he talks, and his breath smells like a corpse marinated in syrup. You discover that tooth decay is actually a status symbol. Only the wealthy can afford enough sugar to rot their teeth. So blackened smiles indicate noble birth. Some middle-class merchants actually paint their teeth dark to appear more aristocratic. You watch a young woman at court carefully applying a black tincture to her relatively healthy teeth, explaining that her white smile was embarrassing evidence of her common origins. The logic is completely backwards, but in a world where sugar costs more than gold, rotted teeth equal wealth. The remedies for tooth pain are almost worse than the decay itself. You observe Queen Christina of Sweden treating her toothache by having a red-hot wire inserted into the cavity to burn out the toothworm. The sizzling of flesh and her muffled screams echo through the palace, but the court physician insists this is the only cure. Others try packing cavities with everything from honey, which makes it worse, to ground pearls mixed with opium, which at least numbs the pain while accelerating the decay. Breath fresheners of the era are equally disturbing. You watch noble women chewing on chunks of ambergris, literally whale vomit, believing it sweetens their breath. Others gargle with their own urine, following ancient Roman practices that actually have some antibacterial merit, though the cure is definitely worse than the disease. One duchess shows you her collection of breath pastilles made from ground mint, roses, and lead acetate. Yes, they're literally sucking on lead candy to cover the smell of their rotting teeth. The extraction techniques haven't improved much by the 18th century. You witness the court dentist of Louis XV attempting to remove an infected tooth from the king's mistress, Madame de Pompadour. He accidentally breaks her jaw in the process, leaving her disfigured and in constant pain for the rest of her life. There's no concept of sterilization. He wipes the bloody pliers on his apron and moves on to the next patient. Cross-contamination spreads infections through the court like wildfire, and several courtiers die from what started as simple cavities. You attend a dental demonstration by Pierre Fauchard, who history will remember as the father of modern dentistry. Even his advanced techniques are nightmare fuel. He's showing off his new method of transplanting teeth from poor donors into wealthy mouths. You watch a young peasant girl have her healthy front teeth yanked out for a few coins, then see them hammered into the bloody gaps in a duchess's mouth. The rejection rate is nearly 100%, but for a few weeks. The duchess can smile without shame, until the transplanted teeth turn black and fall out, usually taking chunks of jawbone with them. Historians still argue whether more nobles died from dental infections or from the treatments meant to cure them. You lean in to examine the towering hairdo of the Duchess of Devonshire and immediately jerk back as something moves. That's not a decorative pin. It's a louse the size of a peppercorn, and it's got plenty of company. Her elaborate 3-foot-high coiffure, held together with bare grease and pomade, hasn't been taken down in 4 months. The smell reminds you of cheese left in a hot car, mixed with the distinctive scent of rotting flesh from the dead mouse her hairdresser will eventually find nestled near her left ear. You watch the construction of these monstrous hairstyles, a process that takes up to 6 hours. The hairdresser starts with the Duchess's own greasy, matted hair as a foundation, then adds padding made from horsehair, wool, and sometimes the hair of dead relatives saved for special occasions. Everything gets slathered in a mixture of beef tallow and flour to make it hold its shape. By the time he's adding miniature ships, stuffed birds, and working windmills to the creation, you're witnessing architecture more than hairstyling. The whole structure weighs nearly 10 pounds and puts constant strain on her neck. The sleeping arrangements for maintaining these hairstyles are torture devices in themselves. You follow the Duchess to her bedchamber, where her maid produces a wooden block with a U-shaped cutout. This is her pillow, designed to cradle her neck while keeping the hairdo intact. She has to sleep perfectly still on her back, and any tossing or turning could collapse weeks of work. You notice scratch marks all over her arms from the constant itching she can't properly reach. Her lady's maid confesses that sometimes they use knitting needles or special scratching rods to provide relief, carefully inserted between the layers without disturbing the overall structure. You're transported to the French court, where Marie Antoinette is setting even more extreme hair trends. Her latest creation includes an entire miniature garden scene with real flowers, now wilted and crawling with aphids, and a working fountain that's long since gunked up with hair pomade. The weight has caused several of her neck vertebrae to compress, giving her chronic headaches. During dinner, you watch in disgust as a beetle emerges from her hairline, takes a leisurely stroll across her forehead, and disappears back into the hairy forest. She doesn't even flinch. This is so common, it's not worth interrupting conversation. The infestation problems go beyond just lice. You examine the hair of various court ladies and find entire ecosystems thriving in their coiffures. Moth larvae feast on the wool padding, creating holes that have to be patched with more pomade. Mice nest in the larger constructions, their droppings adding to the overall aroma. One particularly unfortunate duchess discovers during a court ball that wasps have built a small hive in her hair when they begin emerging, causing a minor stampede as courtiers flee the ballroom. She stands there, unable to run in her heavy dress, while her hairdresser attempts to smoke out the insects with a torch, nearly setting her entire head ablaze in the process. The removal process, when it finally happens, is a horror show you'll never forget. You watch a lady's maid begin dismantling a 4-month-old hairstyle, and it's like an archaeological excavation, layer by layer. She peels away decorations caked in grease and dust. The smell intensifies with each level removed: rancid fat, dead insects, and something worse you can't identify. When she finally reaches the lady's actual hair, it comes away in clumps, rotted from months of bacterial growth. The scalp beneath is a mess of sores, rashes, and bald patches where the weight has literally pulled the hair out by its roots. You discover that some women never fully recover from these fashion choices. The Countess of Suffolk shows you her collection of wigs, necessary after years of extreme hairstyles left her completely bald. Her scalp is scarred from infections and chemical burns caused by various pomades and powders. She jokes darkly that at least wigs can be washed, something that was impossible with her natural hair once it was styled. The irony is that her wigs are styled just as elaborately and cleaned just as rarely, perpetuating the cycle. The tools used for hair care are primitive and painful. You observe a hairdressing session where hot iron rods heated in the fireplace create curls through literally cooking the hair. The smell of burning hair and flesh fills the room as the inexperienced maid holds the rod too long against her mistress's scalp. There's no such thing as temperature control. It's either not hot enough to hold a curl or hot enough to cause third-degree burns. The lady sits perfectly still, tears streaming down her face, because showing pain would be admitting she can't handle fashion. Even between major stylings, daily maintenance is a nightmare. You watch ladies using powder made from flour and white lead to refresh their hair color. The powder gets everywhere, in their lungs, on their food, in their beds. Combined with the grease and sweat, it forms a paste that attracts more vermin. One duchess develops chronic respiratory problems from inhaling lead powder daily, but the court physicians blame bad air rather than the obvious cause. Historians still argue whether more women died from lead poisoning via cosmetics or hair products. The answer is probably both. You follow the Marquise de Maintenon through her morning routine, watching as she liberally douses herself with enough perfume to choke a regiment. The scent is overpowering, a mixture of musk, civet, and ambergris so thick you can actually see the oil droplets hanging in the air. She's not trying to smell good. She's trying to create an olfactory barrier strong enough to mask the fact that she hasn't bathed since Easter, and it's now July. The competing smells create something worse than either would be alone. Imagine rotting flowers mixed with a zoo exhibit on a hot day. You observe the perfume-making process in the palace laboratories, and it's essentially biological warfare. The perfumers work with ingredients that would make modern health inspectors faint. Secretions from the anal glands of civets, aged urine from various animals, and chunks of ambergris that smell exactly like what they are: whale intestinal blockages. These materials are mixed with alcohol and flower oils, creating concoctions so potent they can cause headaches from across a room. The theory is that strong smells drive away miasmas and disease, so the fouler the base ingredients, the more protective the perfume. The application methods are excessive beyond belief. You watch courtiers at Versailles preparing for a ball, and it's like watching chemical warfare preparations. They don't just dab perfume on pulse points, They soak their clothes in it, rinse their mouths with it, and even inject it into their veins, believing it will perfume their blood. One duchess shows you her perfume fountain, a decorative table centerpiece that constantly sprays rosewater mixed with musk into the air. The room is so saturated with scent that candles burn with colored flames from all the alcohol vapor. You attend a royal dinner where the competing perfumes create a nauseating atmosphere. Each courtier wears a different signature scent, all applied with a heavy hand. The Duchess of Orléans favors violet water so strong it makes your eyes water from 10 feet away. The Comte de Soissons prefers a masculine blend of leather, tobacco, and bear grease that smells like a tannery fire. When you factor in 200 people in a closed room, each producing their own body odors under layers of chemical fragrance, the result is a miasma that makes actual sewage seem pleasant by comparison. The perfume bottles themselves become status symbols, and you examine collections worth more than estates, made of crystal, gold, and precious gems. They're worn as jewelry, carried in special cases, and constantly reapplied throughout the day. You watch a lady pull out her vinaigrette, a small perforated container filled with vinegar and herbs, and inhale deeply whenever she passes something particularly offensive, which is approximately every 30 seconds. The vinegar is supposed to protect against plague, but mainly it just adds another layer to the olfactory assault. You discover that some nobles take perfuming to dangerous extremes. The Princesse de Soubise has her servants spray her bed linens with pure essence of jasmine every night, a concentration so intense it causes actual chemical burns on her skin. She considers the rashes a small price for avoiding the smell of her own body. Others burn pastilles of myrrh and frankincense in their bedchambers all night, creating smoke so thick they wake up with blackened nostrils and chronic coughs. The court physicians prescribe more perfume to clear the lungs, creating a vicious cycle. The economics of perfume are staggering. You watch merchants in the palace courtyard selling tiny vials for the price of a horse. The most exclusive scents contain ingredients like crushed pearls and gold leaf, not because they smell good, but because they're expensive. One particularly enterprising merchant claims his perfume contains the tears of angels, collected during thunderstorms. It's obviously fraud, but desperate courtiers buy it anyway, willing to try anything that might give them a social edge in the competitive world of Versailles. You witness the dark side of perfume addiction when you meet the Comtesse de Verrue, who's developed a complete intolerance to her own natural scent. She bathes in pure cologne, drinks perfume water, and even has her food flavored with rosewater. Her skin has developed a permanent chemical burn from the constant exposure to alcohol and essential oils. But she insists the raw, weeping sores smell better than her natural body would. Her physician warns that her liver is failing from ingesting so much perfume, but she'd literally rather die than smell human. The servants suffer even more from this olfactory arms race. You follow a chambermaid whose daily duties include perfuming her mistress's chamber pot, wiping down furniture with scented water, and maintaining aromatherapy braziers that burn continuously. The chemical exposure gives her splitting headaches and nosebleeds, but complaining would mean dismissal. She shows you her hands, cracked and bleeding from handling pure essential oils without protection. The irony is that servants aren't allowed to wear perfume themselves. Their natural odor is considered part of their lower station. Even death doesn't stop the perfume obsession. You attend the funeral of a duchess, where the corpse has been so heavily perfumed that the smell overtakes even the decomposition. Her body was soaked in alcohol and aromatics, then wrapped in perfume shrouds. The effect is grotesque. The sweet smell of roses mixed with rotting flesh creates an odor that makes mourners vomit into their perfumed handkerchiefs. Historians still argue whether the excessive use of perfume on corpses was for the comfort of the living or from a belief that the dead could smell their own decay. You enter the birthing chamber of Queen Anne of Austria, and the assault on your senses is immediate and overwhelming. The room hasn't been aired out in weeks. Tradition demands all windows stay sealed to keep evil spirits from entering and stealing the baby's soul. The combination of blood, sweat, fear, and at least 15 unwashed bodies in a small space creates an atmosphere thick enough to chew. You watch the midwife approach, and her fingernails are caked with what looks like dirt, but is actually dried blood from the last 3 deliveries she attended today without washing her hands. You observe the preparation rituals that seem designed to maximize infection risk. The birthing bed is draped with sheets that haven't been changed since the last royal birth 2 years ago. It's considered lucky to reuse linens that produced a living child. The stains tell stories you don't want to read: rust-brown blood, yellow patches of amniotic fluid, and other substances in colors that shouldn't exist in nature. The midwife proudly tells you these sheets have witnessed 14 royal births, as if bacterial contamination were a blessing. The assembled crowd is a who's who of disease vectors. You count at least 40 people crammed into this chamber: ladies in waiting, physicians, priests, courtiers, and various hangers-on who claim their presence ensures good luck. Each one touches the laboring queen, offering blessings with hands that have just come from the latrines, the stables, or tending to their own festering wounds. One duchess actually coughs directly into the queen's face while leaning in to whisper encouragement, spraying droplets of what's probably tuberculosis across the royal features. You watch in horror as the midwife performs her examinations. She spits on her hands for lubrication. Apparently, her saliva has healing properties, then reaches inside the queen without any attempt at cleanliness. Her assistant brings over a bowl of strengthening broth, made from water that's been sitting stagnant for days, mixed with herbs that look suspiciously moldy. They force the queen to drink between contractions, adding gastric distress to her other agonies. The logic is that vomiting helps expel the baby faster, though you suspect it just adds to the general misery. The medical theories governing childbirth are fascinatingly lethal. You listen as the chief physician explains that the womb is attracted to sweet smells, so they're burning sugar and honey directly under the queen's spread legs to draw the baby out. The smoke makes everyone's eyes water and causes the queen to cough violently during contractions. Another physician insists that loud noises frighten babies into emerging, so they've brought drummers who pound continuously just feet from the queen's head. The cacophony would be comedic if not for the very real agony on her face. You witness the moment of birth, and it's managed with all the hygiene of a battlefield surgery. The midwife catches the baby with the same unwashed hands she's been using all day, immediately rubbing it with salt and wine to toughen the skin. The umbilical cord is cut with a knife that's visibly rusty, then tied with a string the midwife pulls from her own greasy hair. The placenta de delivery is even worse. They yank on the cord like they're starting a lawnmower, causing hemorrhaging that soaks through those lucky sheets. The post-birth rituals are equally dangerous. You watch them wash the baby in wine mixed with rose oil, believing water would be too shocking for newborn skin. The alcohol stings the baby's eyes and any small cuts from the delivery, causing screams that everyone interprets as good strong lungs. They swaddle the infant so tightly its circulation is compromised, turning the tiny fingers blue. When you suggest loosening the wrappings, the midwife looks at you like you've suggested throwing the baby out the window. The new mother's treatment is actively harmful. They immediately feed her restorative foods, raw eggs mixed with wine and sugar, guaranteed to cause food poisoning in her weakened state. The sheets beneath her aren't changed despite being soaked with blood and other fluids. Instead, they just add more layers on top, creating a bacterial breeding ground. You watch flies landing on the bloody linens, then on the Queen's face, then on the cup she's drinking from. The cycle of contamination is endless and obvious to modern eyes. Yet everyone here thinks they're providing the best possible care. You follow up on royal births over the following weeks, and the mortality statistics are staggering. About 1 in 3 mothers develop puerperal fever, what we now know as sepsis from bacterial infection. The symptoms start within days: fever, chills, abdominal pain, and often delirium. The treatments make things worse: bloodletting when they're already weak from hemorrhage, purging when they need nutrition, and applying hot poultices that create perfect incubation conditions for bacteria. You watch the Duchess of Somerset succumb to childbed fever, her death blamed on bad humours rather than the midwife who attended her with hands fresh from an autopsy. The survival rates tell their own grim story. Even queens with access to the best medical care lose about half their babies in the first year. You attend the funeral of a princess who lived just 3 days, killed by an infection that entered through her umbilical cord. The same midwife who delivered her moves directly to another birth, carrying death on her hands like an invisible weapon. Historians still argue whether more royal women died from childbirth itself or from the medical care they received during it, though the distinction hardly matters to the victims. You're following a young duchess into her private chambers when she suddenly clutches her abdomen and rushes behind a screen. Through the thin fabric, you hear her cursing as she struggles with layers of petticoats and corsets, trying to manage her monthly bleeding with the technology available, which is to say, almost none. She emerges holding a wad of moss that's already soaked through with blood, and you realize this is the height of feminine hygiene products in the royal court. The moss, gathered from the palace gardens, hasn't been cleaned or treated in any way. You can see dirt and small insects still clinging to it. You watch her lady's maid help secure the moss with a complicated belt system made of leather and rough cloth that chafes against her thighs. The whole contraption is about as comfortable as wearing a saddle backwards, and about as absorbent as hoping really hard. Within an hour, blood is seeping through her expensive silk gown, but she can't change because she's expected at a court function. Instead, she strategically positions herself near dark tapestries and sits very, very carefully. The smell of blood mixed with the moss's earthy decomposition creates a unique odor that her heavy perfume can't quite mask. The laundry situation for menstrual rags is a nightmare you witness firsthand. Royal women use strips of linen when they can afford it, but these cloths are considered so contaminating that regular servants refuse to touch them. You follow a specialized washerwoman whose sole job is handling bloodied rags, and she's treated like a leper by the rest of the staff. She boils the cloths in huge vats with lye and ashes, but the stains never fully come out. The rags get progressively darker and stiffer with each use, eventually resembling leather more than fabric. Some women use these cloths for years, creating perfect breeding grounds for infections. You discover the bizarre beliefs surrounding menstruation that make everything worse. Court physicians insist that menstrual blood is poisonous, capable of souring wine, killing plants, and driving men mad with lust or rage. You watch a princess being forbidden from entering the kitchen during her period, lest her presence spoil all the food. She's not allowed to touch babies, pets, or even flowers. The isolation would be bad enough, but the remedies prescribed for heavy bleeding are actively dangerous. Drinking lead acetate solutions, sitting over burning sulfur, or inserting pessaries made of ground-up mummy powder. Yes, actual mummies. The attempts at tracking cycles are primitively inaccurate, but elaborately documented. You examine the private diary of Catherine de' Medici, where she records her periods using a complex system of symbols that would make astrologers proud. She genuinely believes the moon controls her flow, so she times activities around lunar phases. This might be harmless, except she also believes bloodletting during menstruation doubles the cleansing. So she has her physician open veins while she's already losing blood naturally. You watch one such session where she nearly faints from blood loss, which they interpret as successful treatment. You witness the social gymnastics required to hide menstruation at court. Ladies develop elaborate code words, the cardinal visits, the red flag flies, indisposed with women's troubles. One countess shows you her special fan with different flower paintings. She carries it positioned to show roses during her period, alerting her friends to provide cover if needed. The paranoia about discovery is intense. You watch a young lady in waiting literally faint from blood loss rather than excuse herself from a royal audience, terrified that admitting to menstruation would end her career at court. The treatments for menstrual pain range from useless to lethal. You observe the court physician prescribing mercury suppositories for cramps, explaining that the heavy metal will weigh down the wandering womb. Another woman drinks a tonic of wine mixed with ground pearls and gold leaf, essentially the medieval equivalent of setting money on fire. The most disturbing remedy involves sitting over a pot of boiling herbs that includes hemlock and belladonna. The toxic fumes are supposed to calm the raging womb, but mainly they cause hallucinations and occasionally death. You follow the mysterious case of the Queen of Portugal, whose period stopped entirely after years of lead-based treatments. The court celebrates this as divine blessing. Surely God has freed her from the curse of Eve. In reality, the lead poisoning has destroyed her reproductive system. But the physicians prescribe more lead to maintain this blessed state. She develops tremors, memory loss, and eventually madness, all attributed to her inherently hysterical female nature rather than the obvious heavy metal poisoning. The disposal of menstrual waste creates its own set of horrors. You discover that some castle servants simply toss bloodied rags out windows into the moat, creating a grotesque soup that breeds disease. Others burn the cloths, but the smell is so distinctive that everyone knows exactly what's happening, defeating the purpose of discretion. One particularly superstitious duchess insists her menstrual rags be buried under a full moon to prevent witches from using them in spells. You watch servants sneaking out at midnight to dig holes in the garden, turning the rose beds into a biohazard cemetery. Even pregnancy doesn't spare women from menstrual taboos. You meet a princess who continues bleeding throughout her pregnancy, not uncommon with the poor nutrition and various poisonings. But the court physicians insist it's her body trying to expel excess female humors. They prescribe increasingly violent purgatives to help the process along, essentially trying to induce miscarriage in the name of balancing her humors. She loses the baby at 6 months, and they blame her overly moist nature rather than their medical malpractice. Historians still argue whether deliberate or ignorant medical intervention caused more royal miscarriages than natural causes. You watch in fascinated disgust as the Duchess of Burgundy passes her prized rouge pot to her daughter, who immediately applies it to her lips with the same finger her mother just used. That rouge contains cinnabar, mercury sulfide, and both women have matching sores at the corners of their mouths that never quite heal. The Duchess proudly tells you this pot belonged to her grandmother, passed down through generations like a treasured heirloom. 3 generations of mercury poisoning, all from one small container that nobody ever thought to clean. You follow the morning routine in a royal dressing room where 6 ladies share everything. The same horsehair brush passes from head to head, collecting lice, fungal spores, and sebum from each user. You actually see nits transferring from one woman's hair to the brush, then to the next woman's scalp. They're also sharing a pot of face cream that's turned grey with accumulated dirt and dead skin. One lady has an obvious case of impetigo, those crusty yellow sores around her nose, but she dips into the communal pot anyway, contaminating it for everyone. Within a week, you'll see the same infection spreading across every face in the room. The jewelry sharing is particularly horrifying once you understand the mechanism of disease transmission. You examine a pair of pearl earrings making their rounds through the French court. The current wearer has infected ear piercings that constantly weep pus, but she slides the earrings through anyway, coating them in bacterial discharge. Tomorrow, they'll grace the ears of the king's mistress. Those pearls are basically petri dishes, carrying streptococcus from ear to ear. The infection travels through the court like a very slow, very painful game of telephone. You witness the preparation for a court masquerade where makeup and costumes are communally owned. The face powders, contaminated with lead and mercury, get passed around in communal puffs that haven't been washed since they were purchased. Each woman presses the same filthy cushion against her face, sharing not just poison, but also skin infections, respiratory diseases, and whatever else their fellow courtiers are harboring. One duchess has visible smallpox scars that she's covering with extra thick powder, and you watch in horror as the next woman uses the same puff, pressing viral particles directly into her own skin. The wig-sharing culture creates mobile ecosystems of disease. You attend a card party where ladies literally swap wigs mid-game as a form of entertainment. The Countess of Suffolk removes her elaborate white wig, crawling with lice and dusted with lead powder, and places it on the Duchess of Marlborough's head. The Duchess's own wig goes to another lady, and so on around the table. It's like watching disease vectors play musical chairs. Each wig carries its own colony of parasites, fungi, and bacteria, and by evening's end, everyone has sampled everyone else's personal microbiome. You discover the economics driving these dangerous practices. A single pot of quality rouge costs more than a servant's annual salary, so of course, it's shared among friends and family. You watch a merchant mixing up a batch of face powder, cutting pure white lead with chalk and flour to stretch it further. He knows it's poisonous. His own hands shake with palsy from years of exposure. But demand is high and questions are few. One batch will be divided among a dozen buyers, each taking home their portion of communal poison. The sharing extends to medical treatments in ways that defy comprehension. You observe a bloodletting session, where the same lancet moves from arm to arm without even a cursory wipe. The physician explains that noble blood is cleaner than common blood, so there's no need for cleaning between aristocratic patients. You watch him open a vein on a woman with visible syphilis sores, then move directly to a young bride for her monthly health bleeding. The blade carries fresh blood and infection from patient to patient, but everyone considers this perfectly normal medical practice. The most shocking discovery is the beauty ritual of urine baths. Yes, you read that correctly. Virgin's urine is believed to clear the complexion, so young ladies in waiting collect their morning water in a communal pot. The older courtiers then wash their faces in this collected urine, believing its purity will restore their youth. You watch the Duchess of Kent eagerly splashing her face with what amounts to a bacterial soup from multiple donors. Some of those virgins have obvious symptoms of kidney infections or venereal disease, but nobody makes the connection between sharing bodily fluids and spreading illness. Even clothing spreads disease in ways that seem obvious now, but were invisible then. You attend a funeral where the deceased noblewoman's wardrobe is immediately distributed among her friends and servants. She died of what looks like tuberculosis. The bloody coughs were a strong hint, but her beautiful silk gowns are too valuable to waste. You watch as women try on dresses still damp with the previous owner's fevered sweat. The fabric harbors tuberculosis bacteria that can survive for months, but everyone's too excited about free court dress to worry about why it became available. The court physicians, who should know better, actively encourage these sharing practices. You listen to one learned doctor explaining that diseases spread through miasma in the air, not through physical contact. He actually recommends sharing personal items as a way to build resistance to illness, like a very misguided version of immunization. Under his guidance, families pass pox scabs between children, hoping to induce mild cases. Sometimes it works, often it kills. Historians still argue whether medical ignorance or medical arrogance caused more deaths in royal courts. You descend into the palace kitchens during preparation for a royal feast, and the first thing that hits you is the smell of meat that's turned. Not slightly off. We're talking green-tinged, maggot-infested, sweet, sick, rotting meat that's being liberally seasoned to mask the decay. The head cook explains that aged meat is more tender, and the stronger flavor shows it's properly ripened. You watch him brush away a cluster of flies and their eggs before hacking off a chunk of beef that's practically liquefying. This will be served to the king within hours, dressed up with enough pepper and cloves to burn through anyone's sense of taste or smell. You follow the storage practices that would make modern health inspectors weep. Meat hangs in the warm kitchen for weeks, developing a rainbow of mold colors that the cooks consider flavor enhancement. The game birds dangle until they're so decomposed they literally fall off their hanging strings. That's when they're considered ready to eat. You observe a servant collecting pheasants that have dropped to the floor, where they land in a mixture of dirt, ash, and rat droppings. She doesn't even brush them off before taking them to the preparation table. The 5-second rule apparently extends to 5 weeks in medieval kitchens. The fish course preparation is even worse. You watch servants unpacking barrels of fresh fish that have traveled for 2 weeks from the coast. The smell could strip paint, and the fish eyes have long since clouded over and sunk into their heads. The solution? Soak them in vinegar and perfume. Yes, actual perfume, to mask the rot. One cook shows you his trick of painting the eyes back on with egg white and charcoal to make them look fresher. He's particularly proud of how he arranges them on the platter, so the most decomposed sides face down. You witness the role of the food taster, and it's both crucial and completely useless. The taster samples each dish for poison, but he's built up such a tolerance to spoiled food that he wouldn't notice if something was actually wrong. You watch him cheerfully swallow a spoonful of soup with visible mold floating on top, pronounce it safe, and send it to the royal table. He's not checking for bacterial contamination. That concept doesn't exist yet. He's only worried about deliberate poisoning, missing the fact that the kitchen staff is accidentally poisoning everyone through sheer negligence. The preservation methods are exercises in creating new and exciting forms of food poisoning. You observe the salt packing process where meat is buried in salt that's been recycled so many times it's more bacteria than sodium. The salt is brown and clumpy with absorbed juices from previous preservation attempts, but waste not want not. They pack fresh meat directly into this biological hazard, where it sits for months developing a complex ecosystem of harmful microorganisms. When it's finally served, the outside is hard as leather, while the inside is often still raw and thoroughly contaminated. You attend a feast where the centerpiece is a peacock, redressed in its own feathers after cooking, except the cooking was just a suggestion. The inside is basically raw, and you can see blood pooling on the platter. But it looks magnificent, and that's what matters. The guests tear into it with their hands, sharing whatever parasites and bacteria the bird was carrying. Within hours, you'll see several courtiers clutching their stomachs and racing for the guardrobes, but they'll blame it on too much wine rather than the salmonella special they just consumed. The sugar sculptures and sweetmeats present their own category of danger. You watch confectioners working with sugar that's been stored in lead-lined containers, absorbing heavy metals along with moisture and rat droppings. They shape elaborate sculptures with their bare hands, the same hands that just handled raw meat, cleaned chamber pots, or treated their own festering wounds. One apprentice with visible syphilis sores on his hands is moulding delicate sugar roses for the Queen's table. The heat from the sugar work makes his sores weep, adding a special protein glaze to the royal desserts. The wine situation would be comedic if it weren't so deadly. You examine barrels in the wine cellar where the contents have turned to vinegar, but rather than waste it, they add lead acetate to sweeten it back to palatability. They call it sugar of lead and add it liberally to any wine that's gone off. The resulting drink tastes sweet, gives a pleasant buzz, and slowly destroys the drinker's nervous system. You watch nobles praising a particularly sweet vintage, not realizing they're literally toasting with neurotoxin. Even the serving practices maximize contamination. Food sits on tables for hours before being served, at perfect bacterial growth temperatures. Flies land freely. Rats scurry across platters when no one's looking, and servants sample dishes with their fingers to check if they're still warm. You observe one footman accidentally drop a roasted capon on the floor, where it rolls through substances you don't want to identify. He simply picks it up, gives it a quick wipe with his equally filthy sleeve, and places it back on the serving platter. No one notices or cares. The aftermath of these feasts is predictable. You follow up the next day to find half the court suffering from what they call a surfeit, essentially food poisoning by another name. The treatments make things worse, purging when they're already dehydrated, bloodletting when they need their strength, and prescribing more rich food to balance the humours. One duchess dies from what's clearly botulism, but the physicians blame her delicate constitution rather than the month-old preserved meat she consumed. Historians still argue whether royal court suffered more from deliberate poisoning or accidental food contamination. The smart money's on kitchen incompetence over assassination. You're shadowing the groom of the stool, the most intimate servant in the royal household, as he performs his morning duties for King Henry VIII. Despite the prestigious title, you're essentially watching a man whose job is managing royal bowel movements. He carries the king's personal chamber pot, a gilded silver vessel that's never quite clean despite daily polishing. The accumulated residue of years creates a patina that no amount of scrubbing can remove. As the king relieves himself, the groom stands ready with cloth and a bowl of water, preparing to perform the ultimate personal service, wiping the royal bottom. You observe the peculiar intimacy of this arrangement. The groom knows more about the king's health than any physician, examining each stool for signs of illness. He notes color, consistency, and smell with the dedication of a scholar, recording everything in a private journal. Today he's concerned. The king's output shows traces of blood and mucus, likely from his diet of nearly raw meat and excessive wine, but suggesting the king change his habits would be overstepping. Instead, he quietly prepares herbal remedies that he'll slip into the king's wine, hoping to ease the royal bowels without anyone noticing. The chamber pot collection in royal palaces tells its own disturbing story. You examine dozens of vessels, from simple ceramic to elaborate gold, each with its own history of royal waste. The cleaning process is haphazard at best, a quick rinse with water, maybe some sand for scrubbing if they're feeling thorough. The same pots are used for decades, developing cracks and chips that harbour bacteria. One particularly ancient pot belonging to the Queen Mother has a crack running down the side that constantly leaks, leaving a trail of royal urine wherever it's carried. You follow a chambermaid whose sole job is emptying noble chamber pots, and she's a walking encyclopedia of aristocratic bowel habits. She can identify each courtier by their output alone. The Duke of Norfolk's chronic constipation, the Duchess of Suffolk's bloody flux, the young prince's worms that she has to pick out with a stick before disposal. She dumps everything into a communal cesspit that hasn't been emptied in years. The overflow runs into the castle moat, creating a soup of human waste that breeds disease and makes the entire fortress reek. The politics of pot management are surprisingly complex. You witness a heated argument between two ladies-in-waiting over whose turn it is to attend the Queen during her morning constitutional. It's considered an honour to be trusted with such intimacy, providing opportunities for private conversation and gaining royal favour. The woman who holds the pot holds power. She's present during the Queen's most vulnerable moments and often becomes a trusted confidant. Some courtiers have built entire careers on their skill at making royal bathroom visits comfortable and discreet. You discover the blackmail potential in these positions. The groom of the stool keeps detailed records that could destroy reputations. He knows which courtiers suffer from syphilis. The distinctive sores are hard to miss. Who's taking mercury treatments? The trembling hands and bloody stools are telltale signs. And who's secretly pregnant? Morning sickness leaves its own evidence. You watch him carefully filing away these observations, creating a kind of fecal intelligence network that makes him one of the most powerful men at court, despite his ostensibly servile position. The medical examinations of royal waste reach absurd levels. You observe the king's physician performing what he calls uroscopy, examining the royal urine for signs of disease. He holds a flask of the king's morning water up to the light, swirling it like a fine wine, even tasting it to check for sweetness that might indicate diabetes. The same flask, barely rinsed, will be used tomorrow and the next day. The physician also examines solid waste, poking through it with a silver rod to check for worms, undigested food, or signs of internal bleeding. His diagnostic tools go straight from feces to his medical bag without cleaning. The servants who handle waste develop their own health problems. You meet a groom who's been in service for 20 years, and his hands are covered in sores that won't heal, likely from constant exposure to bacteria and parasites. He has chronic respiratory infections from inhaling fumes in close quarters. Several chambermaids show signs of parasitic infections they've picked up from handling contaminated pots. But these jobs are hereditary and well paid, so families pass down both the positions and the diseases they bring. The disposal methods create environmental disasters. You follow the path of royal waste from chamber pot to river, watching as servants dump everything directly into water sources. The Thames below London Bridge is essentially an open sewer, thick with human waste from the palaces upstream. During low tide, the riverbanks are covered with a foul-smelling sludge that breeds rats and disease. Fishermen still work these waters, catching fish that feed on royal excrement and selling them back to the palace kitchens. It's a perfect circle of contamination. Even death doesn't end the intimacy. You attend the deathbed of a duchess whose chamber servants continue their duties until the very end. They carefully collect her final evacuations. Believing they have special properties, some think the last waste of a dying person can cure diseases or be used in dark magic. You watch servants fighting over who gets to keep these final specimens, which they'll dry and powder for sale to apothecaries. The chamber pot used during her last moments becomes a macabre heirloom, passed to her daughter along with her jewels. Historians still argue whether these positions created more political power through intimacy or more disease through exposure, probably both in equal measure. You stand in the presence chamber of Windsor Castle, where Queen Elizabeth I has been dead for 3 days, yet her body remains on display. The March weather is unseasonably warm, accelerating decomposition at a rate that has the embalmers in panic. The smell is indescribable. Imagine rotting meat mixed with the sickly sweetness of flowers and the sharp tang of vinegar they're desperately splashing everywhere. Her face, painted with white lead one last time, has turned grey-green underneath. The lips, rouged to seem lifelike, have pulled back from her teeth in a grotesque smile. Courtiers file past holding pomanders to their noses, but nothing really helps. You watch the frantic efforts to preserve royal dignity in the face of biological reality. The embalmers have removed her internal organs, standard practice, but the cavity is packed with sawdust that's already soaking through with putrefaction fluids. They've sewn her back up with thick black thread that's visible through the thin silk gown. Every few hours, servants discreetly change the cloths beneath her, soaked with the liquids that leak from every orifice. They spray more perfume, add more flowers, and pretend the dark stains spreading across her dress are shadows. The tradition demands that monarchs lie in state for weeks, allowing subjects to pay respects. You follow the body of King Louis XIV, whose death in September means his corpse must survive until the October funeral. The embalming process involves removing the brain through the nose with hooked instruments, filling the skull with mercury and spices. But even this can't stop nature. By the second week, his face has bloated so badly that the crown won't fit. The solution? They hammer it into place, crushing the swollen flesh until it oozes through the gold filigree. Courtiers pretend not to notice the flies that have found their way under the royal robes. You witness the preparation of a Spanish princess whose body must travel hundreds of miles to her final resting place. The embalmers coat her in wax, wrap her in cerecloth soaked in tar, and seal her in a lead coffin. But lead is expensive, so they've used a thin sheet that buckles under the pressure of expanding gases. During the funeral procession, you hear the ominous creaking of metal straining against decomposition. Halfway through the journey, the coffin explodes with a sound like a cannon shot, spraying putrefied remains across the horrified pallbearers. They gather what they can, stuff it back in, and soldier on. The lying-in-state ceremonies become endurance tests for courtiers. You attend the vigil for Catherine de' Medici, where nobles take shifts standing guard around her decomposing corpse. The honor guards develop a 1,000-yard stare, breathing through their mouths to avoid the worst of the smell. One young knight actually vomits on the Queen's coffin during his watch, but manages to clean it before anyone notices. The priests conducting services struggle through Latin prayers, their voices muffled by the cloths they hold over their faces. Incense burns so thick it creates a fog, but it only adds a smoky note to the underlying putrefaction. You discover the macabre economics of royal death, though. Bits of the corpse become valuable relics: hair, nail clippings, even pieces of dried flesh are secretly harvested by servants and sold to believers in royal magic. One enterprising embalmer shows you his collection of royal organs preserved in honey and alcohol. He'll portion them out to apothecaries who grind them into powder for medicines. A dried royal heart supposedly cures melancholy, while powdered royal liver helps with digestion. The fact that these organs are diseased and rotting doesn't diminish their market value. The funeral clothing presents its own challenges. You watch seamstresses creating elaborate burial gowns for a duchess whose body has swollen to twice its living size. They have to cut the dress up the back and pin it together like a stage costume. The jewels she's supposed to wear keep sliding off her bloated fingers, so they wire them in place. Her face is so distorted that they commission a wax mask, but the heat from decomposition melts it during the service, revealing the horror beneath. The congregation pretends not to notice as her features literally slide off her skull. You observe the various methods used to mask death's reality. Some royals are essentially mummified, their bodies desiccated with salts until they resemble leather-wrapped skeletons. Others are pumped full of aromatic resins that leak out at unfortunate moments. The Duke of Burgundy's corpse is treated with so much mercury that it turns silver grey and becomes toxic to touch. Several servants involved in moving his body develop tremors and madness, mercury poisoning from handling a poisonous corpse. But tradition demands these displays continue regardless of health consequences. The transportation of royal bodies becomes a logistical nightmare. You follow the funeral cortege of a queen who died in summer and must travel to the traditional burial cathedral. The procession moves at a stately pace while her body liquefies in the heat. They stop at towns along the way for ceremonies, each delay adding to the decomposition. By the time they arrive, the coffin is leaking so badly they have to carry it on special boards to catch the drippings. The bishop, conducting the funeral, keeps his remarks unusually brief, racing through the service while brownish fluid pools around the altar. Even after burial, the dead don't rest peacefully. You visit royal crypts where inadequate embalming has caused coffins to burst from gas buildup. The smell in these underground chambers is beyond description, centuries of decomposition trapped in stone. Grave robbers brave these conditions to steal burial goods, often finding more than they bargained for. One thief shows you burns on his hands from handling jewelry coated in embalming chemicals. Another developed chronic lung disease from breathing tomb air. The dead poison the living even from their graves. A final act of royal privilege. Historians still argue whether the elaborate funeral traditions honored the dead or just created public health disasters. The answer is definitely both. You watch in nauseated fascination as the Countess of Coventry prepares her morning beauty routine. She reaches for a jar labelled Venice treacle, which sounds fancy until you realize it's literally bird droppings mixed with honey. She spreads the grey-white paste across her face with the dedication of someone who truly believes pigeon feces will give her a pearlescent complexion. The smell is exactly what you'd expect. Ammonia mixed with rotting honey. But she inhales deeply, convinced the vapors are tightening her pores. A fly lands on her cheek and gets stuck in the mixture, but she doesn't even flinch. You follow the harvest of these precious beauty ingredients to the palace dovecotes. Servants scrape accumulated droppings into buckets, carefully sorting the fresh from the aged. Apparently, 3-week-old excrement has superior skin lightening properties. They mix it with ground pearls, at least those are clean, and rose water, which does nothing to help the smell. The resulting paste sells for its weight in silver. You watch noble ladies literally paying fortunes to smear bird shit on their faces, convinced it's the secret to eternal youth. The crocodile dung trade represents perhaps the pinnacle of beauty insanity. You travel with merchants who import dried crocodile feces from Egypt, marketing it as an exotic anti-aging treatment. At the mixing house, you observe them grinding the rock-hard dung into powder, adding white lead for extra whitening power and mercury for that dewy glow. The smell during the grinding process makes everyone's eyes water, but they persist. One merchant proudly tells you his grandfather started this business, 3 generations of selling reptile shit to royalty. You witness the application process at the French court, where crocodile dung facials are the height of fashion. Ladies recline while servants paint their faces with a paste that looks like grey mud and smells like a sewer in summer. They leave it on for hours, believing the longer it sits, the more youth it restores. When they finally wash it off, their skin is red and irritated from the bacteria and parasites. But they interpret this as proof it's working. Surely something that causes such reaction must be powerful medicine. The innovations in excrement-based beauty treatments seem endless. You meet an Italian countess who swears by nightingale droppings imported from Japan at astronomical cost. She has a special golden spoon just for applying it around her eyes, where the ammonia burns so badly her eyes stream tears. But those tears, she explains, wash away the signs of aging. Another noblewoman shows you her prized collection of different animal dungs: peacock for shine, swan for whiteness, dove for softness. She mixes custom blends like a sommelier creating wine, completely oblivious to the fact she's basically composting on her face. You observe the fresh cell therapy of the era, which involves applying still warm animal organs to the skin. The Duchess of Marlborough has her servant slaughter a lamb each morning so she can immediately press its liver against her cheeks, believing the life force transfers to her skin. The blood runs down her neck, mixing with yesterday's lead powder to create rust-colored streaks. She sits like this for an hour while the liver cools and congeals against her face. When removed, it leaves an imprint of blood vessels on her skin that she insists makes her look younger. The urine treatments deserve their own category of horror. You watch as the Queen of Denmark washes her face in virgin boy's urine, collected fresh each morning from the palace page boys. The physicians assure her that young urine contains special properties that prevent wrinkles. She gargles with it too, for fresh breath and white teeth. The pages are fed special diets to improve their urine quality: asparagus for clarity, beets for color, turning them into living cosmetics factories. Some develop kidney problems from the strange diets, but their sacrifice is considered noble service. The mud and clay treatments seem almost reasonable until you see where they source the materials. The most prized facial mud comes from the banks of the Thames, right where the palace sewage outlets empty. This black, stinking sludge is supposedly enriched with minerals. It's enriched with something, certainly. You watch servants collecting it at low tide, dodging the dead animals and human waste that litter the riverbank. Back at the palace, they mix this toxic mud with egg whites and crushed emeralds, because adding precious stones somehow negates the fact that it's basically sewage. The most disturbing trend you encounter is the use of human ingredients. The Countess of Bathory famously bathes in virgin blood, but less extreme versions are common. You watch noble ladies applying maiden's blush, powder made from the ground bones of young women who died virgins. The bones are stolen from graveyards, ground in the same mills used for food, and mixed with lead and mercury. One apothecary shows you his special stock of mummy powder, actual mummies ground up and sold as face cream ingredients. The Egyptian preservation spices mask the smell of ancient human remains. The results of these treatments are visible everywhere. You attend a ball where every woman's face tells a story of toxic beauty. Rashes from bird droppings, chemical burns from urine, infections from contaminated mud, and the ever-present lead poisoning creating a parade of dermatological disasters. One duchess's face is so inflamed from her morning lamb liver treatment that she can barely open her eyes. Another has developed open sores from crocodile dung that she covers with more lead paint, creating a vicious cycle of damage and concealment. They compare beauty secrets over dinner, never connecting their treatments to their deteriorating skin. Historians still argue whether vanity or medical ignorance caused more suffering, but watching these women literally poison themselves with excrement for beauty, you realize it's a distinction without a difference. You're standing outside the bedchamber of Catherine de' Medici on her wedding night, and the crowd of courtiers pressed against the door is treating this like a sporting event. Inside, you know the teenage bride is being subjected to a public deflowering that has more witnesses than a royal coronation. The tradition demands that high-ranking nobles watch the consummation to verify the marriage is legal and the bride was virgin. The smell in that cramped room, nervous sweat, stale perfume, and the chamber pot that nobody remembered to empty, creates an atmosphere about as romantic as a butcher shop. You witness the pre-wedding preparations that would make modern gynecologists weep. The bride undergoes an examination by court physicians who check her hymen with unwashed hands, fresh from treating syphilis patients. They declare her intact. Though their understanding of female anatomy is so flawed, they're basically just traumatizing a terrified teenager. The examination tools haven't been cleaned since the last virgin verification 3 months ago. One physician proudly shows you his special silver speculum, its surface tarnished and crusted with substances you don't want to identify. The myths about virginity create medical disasters you observe firsthand. Noble families obsess over hymens like their quality control seals, leading to brutal treatments to ensure their daughters bleed on their wedding nights. You watch a mother forcing her daughter to sit on a mixture of ground glass and vinegar to tighten her before marriage. Another girl receives mercury douches to purify her womb, the toxic metal burning her insides while her mother assures her this pain means it's working. The infections that follow are blamed on premarital sin rather than the obvious poisoning. You discover the thriving market in artificial virginity. Merchants sell everything from fish bladders filled with blood to special pessaries that create the illusion of first-time bleeding. One creative prostitute shows you her technique using a small sponge soaked in chicken blood, inserted just before the act. The fact that many virgin brides need these tricks exposes the reality that the entire virginity obsession is based on anatomical fiction, but nobody dares point out the emperor has no clothes. Or in this case, that the virgin has no hymen. The chastity belt myths versus reality provide their own horror show. You examine actual devices in noble households, and they're nothing like the elaborate medieval contraptions in popular imagination. These are crude iron underwear that rust, chafe, and create perfect breeding grounds for infection. One duchess shows you the scars where her belt wore through her skin during a 2-year absence of her husband. The smell from under the metal is indescribable. Trapped sweat, menstrual blood, and infected tissue. The lock mechanism is clogged with rust and bodily fluids, requiring blacksmith tools to remove. You witness the purification rituals that follow any suspected sexual impropriety. A young noblewoman accused of premarital relations undergoes fumigation. She sits naked over a pot of burning sulfur and herbs, while the smoke supposedly cleanses her vagina of sin. The chemical burns are severe, but her screams are interpreted as demons leaving her body. Another woman drinks a purgative made from mercury and ground beetles to expel any male essence from her womb. She'll be dead within the month from mercury poisoning, but at least she'll die pure. The birthing of bastards reveals the deadly intersection of shame and medical ignorance. You attend a secret delivery where an unmarried duchess gives birth attended only by a drunk midwife paid to forget what she sees. No physicians, no clean instruments, just terror and whiskey. The baby is immediately sent away, and the duchess is subjected to violent douching with near boiling water to erase the evidence. The internal burns and infections that follow are explained as God's punishment for sin. She'll never bear another child, legitimate or otherwise. The sexual hygiene advice given to new brides would be comedy if it weren't so tragic. You sit in on a mother-daughter conversation where the girl is told to never wash her private parts because moisture breeds lust. She should apply a paste of ashes and vinegar after intercourse to prevent pregnancy, and if that fails, jumping backwards 7 times while holding her breath will dislodge any unwanted conception. The vinegar douches cause chemical burns, the ash creates infections, and the jumping does nothing but provide entertainment for servants peeking through keyholes. You observe the treatment of female hysteria, which is basically any emotion or desire deemed inappropriate. The cure involves fumigation of the vagina with various substances, sometimes pleasant perfumes to calm, sometimes noxious chemicals to punish. One physician demonstrates his technique of applying leeches to the labia to draw out excess passion. The woman endures this torture silently because complaining would only prove she needs more treatment. The leeches, reused from patient to patient, spread blood-borne diseases efficiently through the female nobility. The honeymoon customs create their own medical disasters. You follow newlyweds whose families insist on inspecting the bedsheets each morning for proof of continued virgin bleeding. When nature doesn't cooperate, brides resort to increasingly desperate measures, cutting themselves. Using animal blood, even reopening healing wounds. One young bride shows you how she pricks her thigh with a pin each night, letting the blood drip onto the sheets. The constant wounds become infected, but the alternative, being declared barren or unchaste, means social death. Historians still argue whether more women died from childbirth or from the treatments meant to ensure their sexual purity. Watching these brutal practices, you realize the question misses the point. They're all symptoms of the same deadly ignorance. You stand in the lecture hall of the Vienna Medical School in 1847, watching Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis desperately trying to convince his colleagues that they're killing their patients. He's discovered that doctors who perform autopsies and then deliver babies without washing their hands are causing childbed fever. The mortality rate in his ward dropped from 30% to under 2% just by having doctors wash with chlorinated lime. But his fellow physicians are literally laughing at him. One prominent doctor stands up and declares that a gentleman's hands are always clean by definition. Semmelweis will die in an asylum, driven mad by watching preventable deaths continue. But his ideas are slowly taking root. You witness the moment when Queen Victoria changes everything by accepting chloroform during childbirth in 1853. For the first time, a royal woman admits that pain isn't necessary, that suffering isn't noble, that maybe, just maybe, medicine should help rather than hurt. Her physicians protest. Church leaders condemn it as defying God's will, but she insists. The smell of chloroform replaces the stench of terror in royal birthing chambers. Other noble women follow her lead, demanding pain relief, demanding cleanliness, demanding better. It's not perfect. The chloroform doses are guesswork and sometimes fatal, but it's progress. You follow Florence Nightingale through the corridors of power, watching her present statistics that make royal advisors squirm. She shows them death rates from the Crimean War, proving that more soldiers died from preventable diseases than from battle wounds. Her pie charts and polar diagrams illustrate what you've been witnessing all along, that filth kills more effectively than weapons. She carries a bottle of carbolic acid like a weapon, demonstrating how simple cleanliness saves lives. Some dismiss her as a hysteric woman, but Queen Victoria listens, and slowly, hospitals begin to change. You observe the first royal bathroom, with actual plumbing being installed at Buckingham Palace. Prince Albert himself oversees the installation, fascinated by the engineering that carries waste away instead of letting it accumulate. The old courtiers mutter about newfangled nonsense, but when cholera strikes London, and the palace remains healthy while slums die by thousands, even the skeptics take notice. You watch servants learning to use these new water closets, marveling at the idea that waste can simply disappear instead of requiring intimate daily handling. The germ theory revolution unfolds before your eyes as you attend lectures by Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch. They show bacteria under microscopes, the invisible killers that everyone blamed on miasmas and moral failings. A French duchess who attends Pasteur's salon brings a microscope to court, showing her friends the creatures living in their face powder. The screams of disgust mark a turning point. Suddenly, sharing makeup seems less appealing when you can see the bacteria crawling across the lens. Lead and mercury are still problems, but at least now they're sterile problems. You witness the transformation of royal hygiene practices in real time. The new Queen of Belgium insists on daily baths, actual warm water baths with soap. Her ladies-in-waiting resist at first, clinging to their dry washing traditions, but she makes cleanliness a requirement for court positions. The palace laundry expands to handle daily changes of undergarments, so servants are hired specifically to maintain bathroom facilities. The chamber pot, that intimate symbol of royal privilege, gradually disappears into history, replaced by porcelain fixtures and privacy. The cosmetics industry undergoes its own revolution. You visit the new laboratories where chemists test ingredients for safety, a concept that would have baffled earlier generations. They've discovered that lead causes madness, mercury causes tremors, and arsenic causes death. Shocking, really. New cosmetics use zinc oxide and rice powder instead of toxic metals. They still don't work miracles, but at least they don't actively poison users. One forward-thinking chemist shows you his new line of hygienic cosmetics that come in sealed containers to prevent contamination. Revolutionary. You attend a medical conference where Joseph Lister demonstrates antiseptic surgery. He sprays carbolic acid over everything, the instruments, the patient, the very air. The old-school surgeons mock him for the theatrical display, but his patients mysteriously fail to die from post-operative infections. Royal physicians take notice. When the Prince of Wales needs surgery, they use Lister's methods. He survives, and suddenly antisepsis becomes fashionable. You watch operating theatres transform from filthy demonstrations of speed to careful, clean procedures where patient survival is actually expected. The changes come faster now. Electric lights eliminate the need for chamber candles that used to set fire to bed curtains. Central heating means no more huddling around filthy fireplaces. Sewage systems carry waste far from living spaces. You watch the last generation of royal physicians who taste urine for diagnosis retire, replaced by doctors who use chemical tests and microscopes. The groom of the stool position quietly disappears. Its intimate duties no longer necessary in an age of private bathrooms. As our story draws to a close, you stand in a modern royal bathroom, all gleaming white porcelain and chrome fixtures. Hot and cold running water, flush toilets, ventilation systems, electric lights. The journey from chamber pots to modern plumbing took centuries and claimed countless lives. Those royal women who suffered through lead poisoning, mercury treatments, and crocodile dung facials paved the way for change through their very suffering. Their deaths from preventable diseases finally forced society to confront the deadly cost of ignorance. The transformation wasn't smooth or immediate. Old habits died hard. Some nobles clung to their toxic cosmetics and communal hairbrushes well into the 20th century. But the combination of scientific discovery and royal influence gradually changed how society approaches hygiene. Those pioneers who were mocked for suggesting hand washing or questioning lead makeup were eventually vindicated. Progress came on a tide of carbolic acid and common sense, washing away centuries of deadly traditions. Today's royals can shower without fear of plague, apply makeup without risking poisoning, and give birth with a modern medical care. They sleep in clean sheets, eat safely preserved food, and their bathroom habits remain mercifully private. The ghosts of their ancestors, those who died from infected beauty treatments, childbed fever, and preventable diseases, might view such luxuries with wonder. What seemed like radical, dangerous ideas, washing hands, clean water, painless childbirth, are now so fundamental we can't imagine life without them. So as you drift off to sleep tonight in your clean bed, with your modern bathroom just steps away, spare a thought for those royal women who weren't so fortunate. They lived in an age when beauty meant poison, when doctors spread more disease than they cured, and when the most intimate human functions were public spectacle. Their suffering wasn't noble or necessary. It was the product of ignorance that took centuries to overcome. But overcome it we did, one scientific discovery at a time, until the horrors you've witnessed tonight became nothing more than disturbing stories from history. Sweet dreams, and be grateful for soap, clean water, and the revolutionary idea that hygiene shouldn't hurt. The next time you wash your hands or flush a toilet, remember you're enjoying luxuries that royalty could only dream of. Progress is a beautiful thing, especially when it means no longer needing to smear bird droppings on your face in the name of beauty.